Hello and welcome to the Never Heard of It podcast. This is Craig Moorhead.
And I am Shawn Harwell, and this is the podcast where we talk about the movies that have fallen through our cracks.
That's right. If you're looking for us for an online presence of Never Heard of It, you can find us at neverheardpodcast.com. On the Twitters, you can find us at NeverPodcast, at NeverPodcast, right?
That's right.
And otherwise...
Look to your right.
Yeah.
We're here.
We're right behind you. So today we're going to be talking about the 2016 movie. This is our newest movie. Wait, this is our the most recent movie. That doesn't make any sense either.
I know, it's hard to talk about this.
It's 2016. This is our first 2016 movie.
And we should be clear. This movie was released in 2016. This is not,
Right.
Yeah, either way, this is weeks old. This is a baby.
Yeah.
I mean, this is still an infant, this movie.
No one has really gotten a lot of claws into this one. So, right, this is kind of breaking news.
Yes.
You're not going to...
Not only that, I think this is our first true-to-form horror movie that we've talked about, right?
It is. And that was one of the reasons why I chose it. The other reasons being that it was Phil Joannou who directed it.
Joannou.
And I love 3 O'Clock High, and he directed the movie 3 O'Clock High. And Thomas Jane is in it. He's great, you know. It was written by Robert Ben Grant, I believe, who he's written a bunch of co-written a bunch of your big Hollywood blockbusters.
He is. And he is also one of the stars and creators of Reno 911. Yes. He played Officer Junior or Deputy Junior. I loved that show, and I've been a big fan of Robert Ben Grant and Thomas Lennon as his writing partner. You definitely probably know them from The State if you're of a certain age and watched MTV growing up. Mm-hmm. And it's a really, like, as a writer, it's been interesting to watch those guys develop this career because, like you were saying, like, they've done The Pacifier and Herbie Fully Loaded and Taxi, every single one of the Night at the Museum movies, which were monster hits, you know. And these family things that, you know, have this kind of large appeal and all these set pieces involved and are written for big stars, those are hard to write, man. And these guys are constantly employed. So if that interests you at all, definitely check this out for that. I had no idea he had written this or had any sort of branches into the horror world whatsoever. So that was kind of interesting to see. And they also have a book that's supposed to be super funny about screenwriting, which I'm dying to read.
I have that book.
Do you? Okay.
Screenwriting for Profit. There is actually good advice in there, but it's mostly just very, very funny.
Well, Craig, can I ask, where did you hear about this movie?
I saw it in a tweet. In a promoted tweet. Okay. I'm on Twitter occasionally, and I saw it. I can't remember who it was that tweeted it, but it seemed to be a friend of Thomas Jane's who was saying that he's amazing in this movie. It's just out now on Netflix, The Veil, and it just hit all of my sweet spots. It was horror. It was Phil directing it. I knew everybody in it, so I was just very curious about why it's on Netflix and is it good? Can Phil can Mr. Joannou capture his past glories? He's actually done quite a number of things and was doing some pretty big studio stuff, I think in the late 90s or all through the 90s. So that's how I heard about it. Now, cool. Shawn, so what were your impressions? Going into this, what were you expecting?
I was excited when you mentioned who the director was, because it's like you, I sort of look at 3 O'Clock High as one of these extremely underrated, or I don't even know if that's the right word at this point, because I do feel like it's fine, like it's found this cult audience, but a really cool 80s movie. I was trying to think of how to describe it to people who haven't seen it. It's just extremely stylistic, right? Mm-hmm. There's like it's almost like a spaghetti Western overtone.
Yeah.
Meets John Hughes, which sounds like some Tarantino thing.
Right.
But it's not. Like, it definitely does not have like that fingerprint. So,
but it is kind of that thing where movies of that time and of that sort of a budget level tended to be pretty flat. at least visually.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, for sure.
3 O'Clock High is the exact opposite of that. Like I think about, I actually watched a few clips of it again, and it was just, every scene is just, at the very least, it's very visually exciting and interesting. And the pace of it, like everything was really, really tight.
Yeah, and it's not, when you say the other movies of the era weren't that stylistic maybe, but even now, like comedies don't always get that treatment, right?
Right.
So yeah, it's a really fun one to watch for that specific reason. Yeah. But beyond that, I didn't have much to go on. I don't know Jessica Alba's filmography that well. I was trying to remember what that big TV show that she was on. That wasn't a big draw for me. I honestly did not know Thomas Jane was in this. Maybe you told me. I would show you my notes, but it's kind of embarrassing. I was like, this guy sounds so familiar. Like, what is that voice? I wrote down Thomas Jane ? And then I saw it in the end credits. I was like, oh yeah, okay. And that makes total sense and really cool. Definitely a fan of his. But just based on the title, I wasn't sure. I kind of thought, I was expecting to see a real Vale in the movie somewhere,
sure,
which was sort of making me think of like, the old woman in the house that's got the veil over her face and, or the bride that died at the altar, right. Something of those sorts to kind of fill that, that space of those required scares. Why don't you let me do a quick synopsis, shall we?
I will.
Okay.
Have fun.
Okay. This is actually from IMDb. 25 years after members of a religious cult committed mass suicide, the lone survivor returns to the scene of the tragedy with a documentary crew in tow. And that's about as bare bones of a synopsis as you could get.
Yeah.
But if I had read that prior to the movie, it definitely, I think, would have changed my expectations a little bit. So I didn't know. I was like, oh, okay, this has something to do with a cult that is very much, Thomas Jane is kind of presented to be the Jim Jones sort of type. He looks a little bit like Jim Morrison as well.
Right.
I think the peak of the cult or the suicide takes place in the mid 80s in the movie.
It was 85, I think. Something like that.
He definitely still has like a 70s vibe to him though, as a character, for sure. I mean, he's like a rock star. He's wearing rings and jewelry and stuff. But then also the Heaven's Gate cult obviously was tapped on a little bit. The name of the cult in this movie is Heaven's Veil, which is obviously where the title reference came from. And I don't know, like I kind of liked that. Like, I liked this is so stupid. I liked the font of the title when it appeared on screen. It just presented itself in a way that I thought was interesting. And look, the basic plot of this is you're setting up kind of a found footage film,
right.
Which has obviously been all the rage since Paranormal Activity in this particular genre.
And to note, this was supposed to be a found footage movie.
Yep, I read that today.
But then they kind of felt like it had been played out, so they rewrote it for this. But yeah,
and yet it still kind of is. But the found footage in question here are the films that this cult filmed themselves on, like 16 millimeter or 8 millimeter or something like that. They discover their actual canisters. It's not just kids walking around with a video camera. But the plot is taking this girl that was the survivor. She doesn't know who her parents were. She doesn't know her name even, other than the one that she was told, because she was 3 when they all died. And she doesn't know why she also was not given the poisoned sugar cube that they all took to go be with whatever god they believed in. And so, basically, this movie is existing to show us the answers to this girl and what that's going to be. And, I thought there was some decent twists. I thought there was some good scares. I do scare easily. I mentioned prior to this podcast that I would tell this story about my own horror threshold, and I find it still extremely embarrassing.
Please.
Not even sure my wife knows this, but one of my first experiences, maybe the first, being scared by something on a screen was, I remember my mom left the house to go do some errand, and I was left watching the VHS tape of Michael Jackson's Thriller and the making of Thriller. And when he changed into a werewolf, I bolted out of that damn room so fast and hid behind the curtain in my bedroom until my mom came home. terrified. Oh. It's honest to God.
You were 18?
I was 19.
19 years old. Wow.
Wow. No, I was a very young child. I remember distinctly watching Children of the Corn at a friend's house that had one of those gigantic satellite dishes when we were young. That scared the crap out of me.
Yeah.
Nightmare on Elm Street 3, same thing, which was doubly disappointing because I already knew that, like that Dawkins song, I had seen the music video.
Right.
And so, yeah, I don't consider myself an aficionado of the genre and also a great big wussy. So this movie, well, I had, there's some issues that I think we can point out and we'll get to. At the end of the day, I just felt like it kind of worked. Like it kind of held my interest enough, primarily because of that cult element and because of it kept flashing back, or using these found film canisters to what actually happened and why they committed suicide. And there's some cool, interesting stuff there that was sort of almost more supernatural than horror, I thought.
Right.
And so I don't know, and I thought Thomas Jane was so kind of compelling that by the end of it, I sort of forgave its faults.
Sure.
And look, this movie's got it had a 1.5 star rating on Netflix. So I noticed, I mean, I guess, I don't know if people are hating it or what, but that's my take. We can get into it more specifically, but you, on the surface, Mr. Horror himself, Greg Moorhead, did you like it?
I also responded most to the cult sections of the movie. I feel like that delivered the most interesting stuff, and it only gets more interesting as it goes along. Mm-hmm. The Veil is certainly looks very solid. It has at the very least a capable cast.
Sure.
There's no one in there who's not pulling their weight. They have what's his name? I think it's Reed Scott. I don't know if anybody knows who Reed Scott is, but if you ever watch Veep, he's one of my favorite dudes on Veep. I was very excited to see Reed Scott in there.
Oh, I didn't know. Which one? So who did he play? Because
he played Nick. You had a good setup. You see the suicide. You see the CNN footage of this mass suicide. People are there, and then they find this girl sitting amongst all these dead people, and she says, "Don't worry, they're not really dead, or they'll come back," or something like that.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
Which is great. Great opening, totally solid. And then, flash forward to Sarah Hope, who is that little girl grown up, and Jessica Alba is trying to get her to be in this documentary about the cult.
And I believe the actress that plays Sarah Hope, Lily Rabe, I think was on American Horror Story. Is that correct?
That's what I understand, too. I've not seen the season that she was in.
Okay. I don't know, but I suspect people listening to this probably have and may know her from that. Yeah. So Jessica Alba, she's basically the director of the documentary.
Yeah.
We find out why she's making the documentary, which is because her father was one of the FBI agents that showed up at the mass suicide.
And who later killed himself because of dealing with all of that stuff. So she wants to know exactly what went on, too.
And she's got, it was about a 5-man crew. Her brother's the editor. Yeah. There's, she introduces them all. There's a gaffer, there's a PA, there's cinematographer, basically. And
they've all been together for a long time.
Yeah.
And this is the kind of the first passion project for all of them.
I want to predict something.
Okay.
The first time your eyes rolled. Okay?
Yeah.
Was it when you've got a group of young people essentially going into the woods, right? Because this compound is way off the beaten path. They're in the middle of nowhere. There's a kind of creepy farmer guy who lets them in. And they've got this very mysterious woman who has a very prominent historical connection to what happened here in Sarah.
Right.
I'm going to say by the end of those first few hours there, when they decide to stay the night, did your eyes roll? Or is that when you were like, okay, come on?
No, I can honestly say I'm with it up until then. I'm a big fan of horror movies happening in the woods. So that's fine. There are definitely some hurdles to clear later on that maybe don't get totally cleared. But no, I'm 100% into that.
Okay, well, let me ask you. Okay, as an editor,
yes,
if you were the editor on a documentary that primarily takes place at a well-known mass grave, essentially.
Yeah.
Would you stay the night? Would you be willing to camp the night there before anything happens bad, right?
Yeah.
Or would you? Is a cheap hotel too much to ask as a crew member working on a low budget documentary?
My feeling is, first of all, I wouldn't even be there.
Right. There's that. But the editor is her brother,
nobody wants the editor there during that. But yeah, exactly. The editor is her brother. We do see it sort of demonstrated a little while later that she kind of snaps her fingers and he's like, oh, okay. You know, he's the younger brother. Yeah. It is his father who hung himself. So, you know, he's as invested as anybody.
Sure.
So, you know, I was still fine with all of that because they're a bunch of young people. They're making their first passion project documentary. This is kind of a part of it. I kind of wish they had played up that a little bit. Yeah. But Alba's, Maggie. Maggie is Alba's name in the movie. So Maggie's motivation is so serious. There can't really be anything, I don't know, light about it, I guess. It's like she wants to know why her father committed suicide. And Lily Rabe is trying to figure out why she's the only one who survived a mass suicide. So it's like, doesn't seem like the most fun, guys.
No, definitely not. Okay, but this is good to know. Okay, so within that template of 1,000 horror movies of kids going into the woods, you're totally on board with it up to this point. And
yes.
Okay.
Well, I can tell you. Are you still trying to guess when my?
No, I'm not. I'm done.
Because I can tell you when it is. I think we should. It here.
I'll say this. Like, I don't think they draw a lot of attention to the fact that they're staying there and that it's handled efficiently. Mm-hmm. I did ask the question. I don't know. Would I really camp there to make this documentary? Or would we just take the van that we have back every night and come back in the morning? Because you can't shoot at night, really.
Well, but they are pretty far away.
Yeah, they're about 25, 45 minutes away from civilization, I think they say, right?
Right.
Yeah, nearest town, whatever.
So, I don't know. I mean, honestly, you might want to shoot some stuff at night. He does. He shoots a time lapse at night.
That's true.
He shoots a bunch of stuff. So I kind of feel like, they might just stay there.
Okay.
So that did not bother me.
Okay, good.
The first thing that really made me wince in the horror movie cliche vein was the fact that nobody had bars on their phones. And I just felt like I would already feel so much more interested if they could call anyone they wanted to. Mm-hmm. And like let that play out and see how you can work it so that is used. Because anytime it's like that, it's like, oh, we don't have any, like, I don't know. I feel like if they even had thought about it for a second, they would have already known they're not going to have bars up there.
Right.
And then what are you going to do if there's an emergency, which then there is because the van disappears and they find it crashed into a tree and Ed, who I can't remember what he does on the shoot, but Ed is dead.
Yeah, the bars on the phone thing is kind of interesting too because, like, as a writer, there's nothing worse than trying to write like cell phone conversations.
Yeah. Oh,
and nobody just, you can sit in your head and think nobody wants to see this, and yet, I think in this situation, it was probably easy for them to justify there would not be a cell signal here in this location. So let's just address it and forget it, and then we don't ever have to. Cell phones never come up again. I mean, they don't even open their cell phone to like use it as a flashlight,
Right.
It never. They don't. I don't even think we see them in that scene.
And I guess that's the thing. It's not even that I wouldn't believe they wouldn't have bars. I 100% believe it. Mm-hmm. I just wish there was something more interesting.
I agree.
To be done than.
It's a challenge. It's a challenge to figure out what to do in the modern age when, accessibility is right there at your fingertips, almost anywhere. Well,
and they have tons of equipment.
Tons. Is there $80,000 worth of equipment, they say.
Is there any part of them that would think, well, maybe we should have like a device that we could contact someone in case there's an emergency?
Like a GPS satellite phone?
Something.
Sat phone?
Little sat phone. Everybody needs a sat phone.
But that's always the tough question that you got to ask is like, even when you're writing a movie like that's set in the present, it's just like, a character asks a question that can easily be answered by Google.
Right.
Does anyone want to watch Google on their in a movie. No, like it's. I think it's fun to see how writers and filmmakers address that.
Yeah,
because none of us want to shoot it, like, you know, or just you have to make it part of the plot, you know.
Right. We find out they have no bars. Like they're trying to get back to that house. She's trying to take them to that house.
Yeah,
and that's the bit where she walks on water.
That go across the lake,
which was really good. I really liked that moment. I thought it was really well done.
Yeah, it was just turns out to be just a shallow strip of you know, land there on a small pond. But yeah, it looks really cool. And on the other side of this pond is the house where the Jim Jacobs character, Thomas Jane, resided primarily.
Mm-hmm. I think so. Yeah, it was like this was kind of his place. The two things I knew about the place was that was kind of his place, and that apparently, and this I had a hard time swallowing too, unfortunately, whenever the FBI came in and took care of the whole situation, they just never found that house.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I mean, you did have to walk across water to get there. I get that. But I mean, we're talking about the FBI.
Yeah, they would.
So I kind of feel like if there was a house out there, they would have found it. And that creates more problems a little bit later. But anyway. But they find the house. Yeah.
Let's get out of the plot theme for just a second.
Sure.
Because it dawns on me the first scare I had in this movie happened before this.
Oh, okay. What was the first scare?
I'm guessing you had not been scared at all by that.
I wasn't, and I'll say this too. I do have a high threshold for movie scares.
Are you saying Michael Jackson didn't scare you when he turned into a wolf?
No. Yes. I mean, yes, it did. But see, I'm the guy who likes that scared feeling.
You got excited by it. Okay.
So it doesn't. So it's not. It was never something that repulsed me. It was always like, oh, that's crazy. So. But that's the thing, like this. So if a movie doesn't really get its hooks into me, like I don't kind of get jump scared.
Okay, well, I totally get jump scared, and there was one fairly early on where Sarah is walking past. I think the kind of initial house is at the front of the property, and she's either hallucinating or flashing back to seeing a body on the porch of this house underneath the plastic that the FBI uses or whatever, and she walks up to it. I don't remember if she lifts it or over the hand. Anyway, you see this jump coming you see that coming a mile away.
Absolutely.
It still scared me. That's what I'm saying. That's who I am. It still scared. Like I still just like, you know, my body just tenses up when those things happen, and then I kind of laugh, which is obviously the joy of horror movies. But
it is. I was going to say it's kind of like having a low tolerance for alcohol, as far as I'm concerned. Where if you have a low tolerance for alcohol, that means you really get your money's worth.
The party is on.
Like, I mean, you don't have to spend a whole lot, and you're having plenty of fun. So that's good. I'm glad that was working on you.
I also don't remember, but there was an interesting scene that was flashback in the first 30 minutes of Thomas Jane's character. You remember there was an African American girl who was essentially brain dead. Like they're in a room that it looks like it's a hospital. There's a regular doctor, a regular nurse at the foot of the bed, and Thomas Jane is, you know, at this point kind of looks like a snake oil salesman miracle worker, right? By the side of the bed with this poor girl's mother. And that scene took like an interesting turn from like, he's like using somewhat of biblical phrases to like, you know, compel the demon out of this child, but then turns to the mother and was like, he says something about whisper the truth to me about what happened.
Something happened. Yeah. Like the night that she fell into a coma or something, and it's horrible, and you haven't told anybody, you have to tell me. Yeah, and she does, and then he into
convulses, falls to the floor, he's having a fit, and you know, they're trying to help him, and the little girl's hand moves, and she wakes up and comes out of this coma. Yeah. And so I'm still not entirely sure how to connect that to some of the rest, unless that little girl was then the Sam character,
the nurse later. Yeah.
Which
I didn't even make that connection until just now.
It's a recent one for me, but I do think maybe that's one of the only flashbacks you had, and this kind of bothered me because I was like, okay, who's flashing back to this? Like, is this just are we just gonna have like this parallel action of seeing these scenes from the past and this other stuff from the present with Jessica Alba and these people? But then the rest of them happen through the device of those found film canisters, I think, unless there's another one. But
there is something to the way that was presented that made me feel like they really had to mess around with this in editing. And some of the stuff that happened later.
That's a good point.
Because it's a very interesting scene by itself. Mm-hmm. And yet there's a part of me that I think a lot of the tension for me was sucked out of this movie because we kind of get a lot of that kind of stuff early on. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, okay, he made that happen. So he's basically a magical dude. And then you start to have this thing where everybody can hear these whispers once they're in the house. So I'm like, okay, that house is haunted.
Right.
You know, like, there's never a really strong feeling of, is this all bullshit or did this really happen? Is this guy just a crazy cult leader or does he actually have powers? And I wish that there had been a lot more of that because I would
in the first half or total?
I kind of feel total, but mainly in the second half. Because I feel like once they're in the house, it's like, I don't know, there doesn't seem to be a lot left to figure out. Yeah. As far as, are you in danger? And is this place filled with magical, supernatural stuff
that's true.
You can't get your head around?
At that point, we're like, no, this place is absolutely terrible. Yeah. You got to get out of here.
Right.
And that's where that kind of kicks in.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting because I did sort of feel like in that first half, like, okay, yeah, where exactly is the tension coming from? What exactly is the mood of this film? And like, I think for me, and plot, like, like that's what I sort of gravitate to. Those are the horror films, I guess, that end up sticking with me that I do seek out, are the ones that have like those kind of like strong elements and not. Yeah, I'm not going after the jump scares because clearly they work too well on me.
Well, think about The Ring, for instance, which that's a movie that scared me deeply. Yeah, and I think has a great kind of similar to this. It's like, what's going on? Why is this tape causing these things? Let's find out. Kind of mystery to it, and it's also really scary at the same time.
Yeah, you have to suspend that, and that's tough to do really, really well. I will say, for me, there was a change, and it was the second time I got scared out of my underwear, was when they do go into the house and they find that back room where I don't remember if they got the lights on at this point, but you do find out there's been like film lights set up, you know, and this room is like clearly some sort of like significant room as far as documenting something of this cult that happened here. And they then discover the corpse on the ground, kind of handcuffed to the to the radiator, and Sarah ends up putting her hand in the corpse. I don't remember how that happened exactly. That was like her reaction to I thought was fantastic. She's like, oh, it's like this like guttural body. Repulsion that would have been me in a heartbeat.
There was certainly an appropriate amount of revulsion on the part of everyone involved. Yeah,
running out of there as fast as they can, pouring hand sanitizer and water and probably rubbing alcohol on her hand to get whatever it was that she just touched. Like, that's exactly what my first thought was like.
I'd never eat with that hand again.
Got to get that off my hand. I don't care what it is. So that definitely got me. And but like you say, I think that's maybe the turning point then, where they're kind of committed to that house in those few locations. Like it doesn't really venture out beyond that. And you're right. Like I don't know. I was still piecing all these separate things together. But yeah, maybe there isn't that much happening. I don't know. That's interesting. Like it didn't really occur to me because obviously this is when, you know, it's a horror movie, so people start getting killed.
Right.
kind of.
Sarah's been having a lot of scary dreams.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, so now there's a corpse in there. They found all this film, and they found a videotape that's in a videotape recorder there, and so they decide to watch the videotape that's in the recorder that's next to the dead body, and. So a little bit of this drove me crazy. The first part of this is just being a snob. But
I think I know what you're going to say, but go ahead.
It just didn't look at all like VHS.
Nothing.
And it was very
whatsoever.
After Effects plug-in, sort of like put on the VHS effect. It's like,
and the film that they left behind as well didn't look anything like 8mm or 16mm. I mean, just
I'll get on the film. All the film stuff drove me nuts. For a million reasons.
But it didn't even look like they were trying to make it look like that. I mean...
Except every now and again, they would pretend like there was a rollout or something.
Yeah, and it boggles my mind as to why they didn't... Because it would have been creepier if they had, I think.
Yes. I mean, well, they should have shot all that stuff on 8mm.
Yeah.
But here's VHS. The other thing, Shawn. Every time they go in and watch one of those strips, every strip has like 10 angles.
Yeah.
And I was like, who's shooting all this?
No, and it's perfectly held still and all this stuff.
And so that was another time that I figured like they had to like let some stuff go in editing.
Well, and what's funny about that too is one of the first things I noticed in this movie was when the first bit of shooting that Jessica Alba and her crew do is simply following Sarah as she's walking into the compound.
Yeah.
And you've got the one guy, Matt, I think his name's Matt, or Max, who's the camera operator.
Yeah.
And then Jessica Alba's also holding a camera. They're both using DSLR, right?
Right.
They're like 5 feet apart. They're both behind Sarah. So they're essentially getting the exact same. I was just like, this, I mean, they're not, like, who would possibly be shooting this particular footage? And I do think, like, once, I found out that this originally was supposed to be a found footage film, and then they changed it and revised it. I feel like that is the weakness of this movie, that it feels like it got lost somewhere in the middle between those two things.
Yeah.
To the fact that I wonder if, God, I don't see how, but you almost have to, like, ask the question, like, were those flashbacks, I mean, that stuff with Thomas Jane, because it doesn't look anything like VHS or 8mm, like, were those...
Not a little bit, not even a little bit.
Was it shot to not be, and then they added that stuff in later? Like, I don't know. I mean, I can't imagine, because then it would just be straight flashback. Like, I don't know how that would work, but...
Right. Well, and there's also sort of the problem for me, although it was still interesting to watch those reels of film and all that.
I mean, there's cool stuff happening in those things.
Yeah, and again, like the cult stuff is kind of the most interesting stuff that happens, but then it kind of fell into a thing for me where it's like, so they all went here to figure out, the secrets of this mass suicide. Mm-hmm. So now they're going to sit down on a couch and watch.
And just watch it.
Yeah,
and record it.
Yeah. Jesus Christ. Well, I mean, why didn't you just take all the reels of film and get the fuck out of there?
That also crossed my mind, too. And they kind of talk about... One of the first things I was like, okay, you found a corpse, forget it. Like, you got to leave. You got to go call the cop, because this is a crime scene. Like, this is still a crime scene.
And they say that, and I 100%
they do address
agree with
it. But I was like, I don't think there's an argument to be had. No. At that point, it's just like, all right, we're all just gonna walk. And I don't even know if they tried that, and Sarah was like, no, I'm not leaving. But I do think Jessica Alba at one point was like, she becomes the focal point of saying, no, let's stay here, we came to do this. And I just want to talk about her performance for a second, because I feel like, I don't know, it's a fine line. I thought, on the one sense, I was glad that she was not overly aggressive in demanding that they stay, and that she's so obsessed with this, that they have to do this and that kind of thing. But on the other hand, it was almost too relaxed for me. Like, I wanted like 10% more of her saying, passionately why they should stay, like being persuasive in that manner.
Or I think maybe ideally, if the movie could have not revolved around them sitting and watching movies, ideally it would be her doing crazier and crazier things to find out what's going on. Like, I'm going to climb that mountain because that's where it's just like, you're so nuts.
Yeah.
But yet she doesn't have a lot of reason to demonstrate how passionate she is about it.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Let me ask one question that I didn't quite understand. They do set up the film projector. They watch those film canisters, and they're also... they use the word digitizing. Yeah. Which I didn't understand. I thought maybe they're just using their digital cameras to film it.
That's what I thought. That's what they seem to be doing.
But there's the girl that kind of reminded me of Darlene from Roseanne.
The sound girl.
The sound girl, who I liked, actually. I like that actress, so it was good. She's got like a mixer, and they're pulling up the levels of tracks from the different rooms in the house. Like, I didn't understand.
There was never set up for that.
Yeah, it's like, what... they got a microphone in every room, and that's what I didn't quite follow exactly what the process of this was when it's at. And again, we're not supposed to care, but it becomes you can't help but care because
you're just not seeing it happen.
Yes,
and there was actually that moment reminded me for whatever reason of a little bit about Poltergeist. You have that part of Poltergeist where these people come in to investigate what's going on, and they have all this equipment, and as I remember, there is something like that where for whatever reason you're seeing empty parts of the house. I can't remember what scene that is, but yeah, exactly. Like, I would have loved. I mean, why not just take a second and just say, hey, let's set up mics in each one of these rooms because we keep hearing this weird stuff. But honestly, hearing the voices again, and no one, and everyone's like, oh, there are those voices again. Let's watch another one of these films. What do you mean? Like, if you heard voices that were disembodied voices, why are you not going out of your mind?
Yeah.
So I don't know. That stuff, I don't know. It definitely started to lose me. But so we have, Ed has crashed into a tree. Everyone knows that Ed is dead. They've put him on the ground, put a tarp over him, put rocks on top of the tarp, and say, okay, well, we're going to go first light. We're going back. We'll find somebody. Mm-hmm. They end up going back to the house to watch stuff. And then Nick goes into the house for some reason.
Well, he does. In fact, actually, this was my favorite comedic line of the movie. I think it was at that moment. The generator dies. The guy notices that one of the spark plugs is burnt out. Yeah. So, of course, Nick, again, gets sent to go look for the spark plug by himself in the creepy house. And as he's going in frustrated, the Matt goes, so just, a spark plug, it looks like this. And he's like, oh, you mean it looks like a spark plug? Thanks. Like, I genuinely laughed. Like, that character, that little moment there, it worked for me, and that is Reed Scott.
That's Reed Scott, and if you enjoyed that comedic moment, I suggest you watch all of Veep.
I got to get on it. Okay, cool. I think this is the first I've seen of him, but I did like that moment. And then he meets his demise of sorts.
Right. So one way or another, he ends up with a throat full of syringes. I don't really think it matters why. The whole point is that he dies.
Right.
I thought it would matter what he was being injected with because they showed Thomas Jane being injected with this mixture that I made up myself, and he dies at some point, and then sort of inhabits another person's body in the room, and then he comes back to life. And this is kind of what he's always been trying to do, is he's been trying to figure out how to become immortal, basically.
Yeah, it's the being John Malkovich thing a little bit. It's the soul in search of a new body.
Right. But
I think it's interesting. I like that stuff.
Tremendously interesting. And the fact that he's doing it and making it happen makes it even more interesting. What makes the movie less interesting to me a little bit is that you find out, like, once you realize he can do that,
right, then
there's no question anymore. It removes some of the tension I feel like I wish was there.
Right, as to why.
Yeah.
As to what they were trying to do.
But so Nick dies, and then somebody asks where Nick is, and somebody says, oh yeah, I saw him heading out to the generator. So no one knows that he's dead. And the minute that happened, Shawn, I perked up. I was like, oh, okay, now this is getting interesting.
Okay, cool.
He goes out, the PA who has a crush on him is out at the generator, and he acts very friendly toward her. Yeah. And then he bashes her head in with a wrench, and then next thing you know, the two of them are walking in the house.
Yep.
And I was like, I just felt a tremendous burst of energy there, and I was feeling great about the movie. At least
I think you're right, and that's probably, it's an hour and a half movie. I'd say that's a good. Are we 40 minutes in probably before that happens?
I think we're past halfway.
Yeah. Okay.
I think halfway is when they decide to go back into the house and sit there and watch movies. But yeah, so it's interesting. I know exactly what's happening though.
Yep.
Like, I don't feel any question about what's happening. I don't have any questions about who's inhabiting his body. But yeah, so I'm saying I feel kind of ahead of the movie now.
Let's talk about, okay, what did you like about the last act of this movie? What worked for you as a horror fan? If anything.
I mean, yeah, that's the problem. Not a lot. There was a point where someone, and I think it's when they're watching the movie, someone makes the comment, and this is much later than the things we've been talking about. Someone says, "Oh, he's really not a fake." And all
Jessica
I could think
Alba
was, I've known that since the first 10 minutes of the movie. You know what
That's
I mean?
true, yeah. And that's where that scene with the brain dead girl actually probably works against your main characters having the same amount of knowledge as the audience.
Right.
Yeah, it's a good point.
It feels like this could be a point in the movie maybe where realizing he's not a fake means you're in a lot of trouble because you're still here. Whereas you thought you're protected because, this is a lot of hogwash and we're just going to expose how dumb this cult was. But then you realize, oh, no, wait a second. He does have the power to do this kind of stuff. So now we're in trouble. So what worked for me was when we went back in time again.
Yeah.
And we see what happens when the FBI shows up. And we see what Jim Jacobs, who, even though he's been this very charismatic cult leader through the whole thing, he talks like a crazy cult guy, but he actually is figuring stuff out. These things that he's saying he can do. And when the FBI shows up, it reveals this other part of him that kind of shows he is not not to the point where his ego is so big he would just let people die.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say more than that.
I think let's leave it at that. But I do think there's a murder in that. Well, I mean, it's a pseudo murder.
Right.
There's a beating in that one of those last sermons.
Yes.
Not the very last one.
Yeah.
That completely caught me off guard and was like, holy cow, Thomas Jane. Woo.
And I think that was the he's not a fake moment.
Yeah.
But yeah, exactly. Like when you're there in the cult, when you're there with him in that moment, that worked great. And the FBI showing up at the end and that whole, and like what is revealed there just felt very satisfying. Like, it felt like something was being revealed that I didn't know, and it just felt good in that moment.
One of the things that I did like from the present story was Ed's reappearance. And then remember he takes that one girl to the lake, and I'll leave it at that. But the way they shot that, I thought, oh man, that's kind of that was like more creepy to me than, or just horrific. Like it's horrific watching that a little bit.
Yes.
I thought that was kind of interesting, and then obviously that character becomes somewhat important to the rest of the thing. Although, man, the way things get resolved in this movie was a big letdown to me, in that there's some significant action that happens as audio only at the very, very end. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Which seemed a very curious decision to me.
Yes.
Because
like it gave you the jump scare, and then a whole thing happened.
A whole thing happens. Yeah. That you only hear.
Yeah.
It's not a situation where you're Paranormal Activity or you're Blair Witching it and you're seeing, the viewfinder of one of those DSLR cameras. So you're actually like seeing things. No, just there's straight black.
Yeah.
You hear some stuff and then it comes back.
Right.
Oh, the final scene was kind of cool with Jacobs.
Final scene is cool. Thomas Jane definitely chooses scenery. Like he's got all that down. But it's still, and I actually wrote in my notes, the last note of the whole thing was the ending felt like the beginning of something better.
Yeah. I feel like I would have to watch that monologue like 2 or 3 more times to crack the code of what the hell he was saying.
There was some
like it sounds cool. Like, and it, like, its delivery is great, and it sounds like maniacal, but also sort of like pseudo intellectual, or at least spiritual and philosophical. But I don't know what it was. I was surprised by the resolution of Jessica Alba's storyline. I will say that.
Yeah,
didn't see that coming.
Yeah, I didn't understand the point of that beyond it's cinematic.
Yep, me either. So that was a bit puzzling to me when that's... I guess you could argue that she's not the main character. And in some ways I actually wrote, is she the antagonist?
I mean, kind of, yeah.
Yeah, I mean... because
she's not what you might call the bad guy, but she's, yeah.
Yeah, so by the end of it, definitely there were some execution things there in that last little bit that kind of didn't quite work for me, but again, on the whole, I think I'm with you. I liked the cult stuff. I thought that was an interesting element.
It really was.
Once again, we're talking about a movie where there's like an alternative faith, and like, holy smoke, we're kind of intrigued by this stuff, and we're not getting the entire movie about that. So I don't know if we're just gonna have to go make like a cult movie or something.
Yeah.
What would do you have any other, because I think you've mentioned some, but is there a simple fix that you think would have helped this movie significantly?
I don't know if there's one simple fix, but I mean, there is just the thing for me where I feel like it might have been more interesting if we didn't know if he was full of crap or not.
Until the end.
Yeah. Because
I think
in real life, I feel like we've all been raised to just think of cult leaders as just crazy guys with a messiah complex, and they just want people to follow them and do weird stuff with them. And if we could have ridden that out a little longer, might have made things more interesting. But I still feel like all the stuff happening in present day needed some work too. So I don't know.
I think I would have ditched the documentary idea. I just watched that movie, The End of the Tour. You know about that? It's the Jesse Eisenberg and Jason Segel, about David Foster Wallace. And I was thinking today about, I really, really like that movie, but and there's a way that they use the simple like pressing record on a tape player as having significance when someone's committing something to tape. That I almost wish like this had just been an interview. Like she's just interviewing this girl, Sarah, and they're going to this place, and then some of these things happen. Or conversely, if the movie had been about 1985 and there's a woman sent to interview Jim Jacobs, and the whole movie takes place in the present of the cult, and then maybe your last 10 minutes are after that suicide or something like that, would have been intriguing to me. Like that's something I haven't seen before. Exactly.
Absolutely. Or what if kind of going off that first idea, what if Alba goes and just interviews this woman and says, by the way, I found all these film reels, we're going to watch some of them or something, and then halfway through the movie the lady says, I could take you out there, like I can get, and then it's then it kind of ramps up that way instead of going for the entire thing.
Then you're not sitting in a haunted house watching movies.
A haunted house filled with corpses and rats, and you're watching,
and a projector, baby.
Yeah.
They really missed having some popcorn, I gotta say, though. Like, nobody eats in this movie, but they should have had some
anything, that's what bothered me, too.
Well,
two things just about the very surface of the movie. Number one, it's desaturated to the point of almost being black and white the entire time.
Yeah. And to the point where I wish it had been a little lighter.
Yeah, I would have loved to see a little more color and not felt like everything is just dead. Everything is dead, and we must...
Yeah.
Like, it felt already too dark, like it was saying, this is a horror movie.
I agree.
But
dark when there wasn't tension, so it was just like, well, I can't really see what's going on. Like, to show me, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Or just, like... walk us into that darkness. Don't start that. Right.
Or take the color out as we go along or something. But I mean, it just jumped out. I mean, right at the beginning, it was like so contrasty and dark. The other thing that I kind of liked off and on was the choice, and I have no idea, this could also just be an After Effects thing, but I don't know why it would be. But they were using an anamorphic lens that really distorted the sides of the frame, and I mean, it was through the entire thing.
Yeah.
And I was really fascinated by that. Like, anyone on the side of the frame just becomes very skinny.
That was a problem, is that, it wasn't framed, they wasn't staged as a way to not be noticeable or distracting. Right. I kind of wonder what happened there.
Well, I don't know. I mean, honestly, I just felt like that was a choice for one reason or another, that was a choice because I mean it's very noticeable throughout the entire thing.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I just assumed it was something with my stream or something. Yeah. Okay, let's talk about it. I have a question for you. Why don't you play in hell?
That seems very hurtful.
Very
hurtful.
Is the name of a movie.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard of it? It's from Japan, so it's probably called something else in Japanese, just a guess. It came out in Japan, Craig, in 2013. Came out to these here American states, 2014. And it stars some Japanese people I don't think you've heard of. So that's what you're getting from me.
Well, I'll tell you what. It sounds familiar.
Okay. I'm sure people ask you that very question all the time. Why don't
well,
you play
yeah,
hell?
And so it's
like
kind of hard to separate those two things. But
okay.
It sounds familiar, but it also sounds like a lot of fun. So I'm just going to say I've never heard of it.
I like that compromise. Great. This is streaming on Amazon. Go check it out and come back next time and we'll get into it.
Looking forward to it.
I'm looking forward to it as well, Craig. And everybody out there, you have a good night. And
God bless.
Sleep tight.